Bene. Good morning, my relatives. Hello. It is Thursday. What is it? March 5th already? And I'm sitting here with my second cup of coffee, and I am excited to talk to you. Actually, it's March 6th. Sorry about that. I just looked at my calendar. So it's Thursday, March 6th. I'm here with my second cup of coffee and excited to talk with you about some of the things going on in our world and how we can live better in the midst of all of this. But before I begin, let me do like I always do and acknowledge I'm speaking to you from what used to be called, what is now known as Washington, D.C., but it's traditionally the land of the Piscataway. And as I always do, I want to honor the Piscataway as the hosts of the land where I'm living. I want to thank the Piscataway for their stewardship of these lands. And I just want to state how humbling it is to be moving, breathing, living, working, existing on these lands today. So, my Piscataway relatives, thank you for your stewardship. So, the title of this episode is Self-Care is Why I'm Waiting a Week to Talk About Trump's Congressional Address. If you've been following the news at all, you will know that earlier this week, Trump gave the largest modern day State of the Union, our congressional address, in a very long time. And it was an hour and 40 minutes. He spoke to a joint session of Congress. There were protests on the Democratic side and adoring support on the Republican side. And there was, I'm sure you've heard the headlines, you've seen the news. And I know I need to talk about it at some point, and I'm going to, but I'm not going to do it today. And the reason I'm not going to do it today is because I need to take care of myself, and I want you also to take care of yourself. And Trump is very, very good at gaslighting and at centering the attention onto himself and at creating problems that only he can solve and at just causing constant chaos. He's very, very good at that. And we need to not fall into that, right? I mean, the media loves it because this is how they sell advertising. The Democrats are excited about it because it gives them something to scream about on a regular basis. The Republicans are blinded, adoring this man who they worship as God. And yeah, it's a fascinating thing to watch. But if you're anything like me, you wake up in the morning and you're just dreading reading the headlines or looking at the news because you know something crazy has happened in the last, not even 24 hours, the last 3 hours or even 45 minutes, right? There seems like there's just always something going on coming out of Washington and coming out of the Trump administration. And in a way, he's pressing the limits here or ignoring a court order there or saying this to a world leader here or, causing chaos in this area. And one of the reasons I don't want to address his congressional address today, not that there's nothing in there that doesn't need to be talked about. There's many things we need to talk about in that address. But at the moment, Democrats are screaming about it and Republicans are at best being silent, if not just fawning over every word he says. And now is not a good time to have a conversation about what Trump is doing. I several years ago, decades ago, literally, I wrote a blog post, and I'll share it with you if I can find it, about what you need to do to speak in the midst of kind of the political chaos that goes on in our nation, and what some of my goals were for that. And one of the things is to have a consistent message, but it's also not to join the screaming match and not to be a part of the craziness that just goes on. And so I decided intentionally to wait a week to talk about the congressional address. I will discuss it. Hopefully next Thursday is my projected date. To have a conversation about it and some of the things we need to note coming out of that. But I didn't want to join the screaming that's going on right now. And I didn't want to add into the chaos of all of that. So I want to instead talk about self-care. Now, I know, and I've said this before, right? I'm not a psychiatrist. I cannot diagnose Donald Trump. But when you read about the narcissistic personality disorder, when you read about that disorder, and then you look and you compare that list of symptoms and of behaviors to what Trump does, how he says, how he acts, how he presents himself, he does seem to act like someone who has a narcissistic personality disorder. I cannot diagnose him, but he does portray many, many, many of those traits, whether it's self-aggrandizing or wanting to be the center of attention or pathologically lying. I mean, there's so many things he does that just fits the what someone with that disorder does or has or behaves. And so, as I've done in the past, I've been reading more about what you need to do to live with a narcissist. And not that any of us are living with Donald Trump, but we're in a nation where he has not just the command of our military and of our politics, but he has the command of our attention because there's so many cameras watching him, and he knows how to get himself on camera. And so he's very, very good at that. And so it's like he's invading parts of our lives that we're not used to being invaded, especially by our politicians and our presidents. And so I wanted, one of the things when you read articles, and I'm going to share a few articles with you. I don't know a lot about these websites, but they all say similar things, and they all seem like they have a fairly measured tone in them. There's an article from TalkSpace called "How to Live with a Narcissist." Here is another article from Healthline that is titled 10 Tips for Dealing with Someone with Narcissistic Personality Traits. I'm going to put that in there. And then there's a third one from Charlie Health, which is called Things Narcissists Say in an Argument and What They Really Mean. And when you read through not just these articles, but other articles, right, one of the things it talks about to deal with a narcissist on a regular basis is you need to set boundaries for yourself. You need to set physical and emotional boundaries for yourself. And you need to practice self-care. What do you need to do to maintain your own mental health, your own physical health, your own sanity in the midst of the chaos that tends to swirl around people who have a narcissistic personality disorder? And one of the things that, as I was reading through some of these traits of people with narcissistic personality disorder, they talked about the gaslighting, they talked about a lot of things, but I saw a symptom that I had not seen before. I'm going to put the definition here into the chat. This is from the Charlie Health article, Things Narcissists Say in an Argument and What They Really Mean. And it talked about the issue of triangulation. And an example of that, so-and-so thinks I'm right. You should listen to them. And the explanation of that phrase or of that is the narcissist believes involves a third party to create doubt or division between the victim and others, manipulating the victim's perception of reality. And that is something, right, we experience from President Trump almost on a daily basis. People say, the media says, people are talking about these, they say this, everybody loves me, everybody hates me, this is going on here, this is happening here. He evokes the third person narrative on a very consistent basis, creating doubt, division between us, his victims, and others, and manipulating our perception of reality, which is that's what he's doing. And I had not heard of that term triangulation before. I mean, I've heard the word, but I haven't heard it applied in this context. And so I thought it was really interesting. And it actually made me very aware of, this is very much the language that President Trump uses. And it's one of the things that makes him so exhausting. is this constant bombardment of and confusion that he's creating in the reality that he's presenting himself in. So anyway, the point of all this is we need to practice self-care. We need to set boundaries. We need to make sure that our physical and mental health is stable during these next 4 years while he's in office. And the setting boundaries part is something I want to talk about first, which is, right, we need to make sure that we're not only are we not on a daily, on a massive consumption of news and media, but that we're also not on a massive consumption of social media. Because social media, which is driven by algorithms, which is all about wanting to make you click and to stay engaged and to go deeper and deeper and deeper into the rabbit trails, right? That's where this becomes massively toxic. Over the past several weeks, I've been actually tracking my social media use very carefully and trying to keep that down to a minimum and making sure I do not go down too many rabbit trails, because I know just for my own mental health, that's not a good way for me to live. It doesn't help me in my day. It doesn't even help me in the work I'm doing to have discussions about this, because it brings me down rabbit trails that are not useful or helpful. And so I've been very intentional to track my social media usage these past few weeks to make sure I'm not spending too much time being brought down these rabbit trails. Now, I do try to stay on top of what people are saying and what's being said, but I don't want to get caught up in that curated reality that the social media companies create for us. The other thing I try to do is I actually am being very limited now with how much news I expose myself to. And I make sure I'm getting headlines from more reliable, trustworthy news sources. I've always been very intentional about that. But especially, I work to not just sit in front of watching the news, but I hunt my news. I go to websites. I read headlines. I go deeper into the stories I want to find. I don't click on articles that friends or relatives or acquaintances send me, because if anything else, I'll look up the headline and find it from another reliable resource, right? Because people often send the Fox News or the extreme right or the extreme left articles, because those are always the most attention grabbing. And so I try to find the same issue or a similar story or coverage about that story from a more reputable news source to find out what actually was said and what was going on there. I don't even listen to my news podcasts near as much as I used to, just because I'm working hard to set up some healthy boundaries. Now, this is not putting my head into the sand and ignoring the reality of what's going on. I definitely work to stay on top of the news, but I work hard to make sure the news and the effect of the news doesn't dominate or dictate my day. And I really want to encourage you, my relatives, to do something very similar. We obviously need to know what's going on and what's being said, but it's like living in Washington, D.C., right? Whenever people always call me, and especially family and friends, and say, hey, I heard this was going on. I wanted to check to make sure you're okay. And I always tell people, yeah, the Washington, D.C. you see on the news and the Washington, D.C. that most of us live in are two completely different places, right? The Washington, D.C. you see on the news is the headline grabbing, heart attack inducing, right? That's where you can't live there for more than 6 or 9 months at a time without just having massive overload. And so when you live and you're not part of that political machine and you're not in that on a daily basis, you can actually live here much longer, but you learn how to separate yourself from that craziness, right? I mean, I've said this before. I can always tell who's in office by who's in town for what reason. Trump's in office, so all my conservative friends are coming to town for meetings at the White House. Trump's in office, so all my liberal friends are coming to town to protest, right? This is what they come to town for. This is what they're doing. When Biden was in office, all my liberal friends came to town to meet at the White House, and all my conservative friends came to town to protest. I mean, this is what they do. And so that's the world I don't live in. I live here on a daily basis, and if you're going to live here on a long-term basis, you have to learn how to separate yourself from that constant craziness of lobbying and protesting that happens all the time. And now, because it's just getting even bigger and louder because of the behaviors of President Trump, we have to be even more careful. And so I want to encourage you to make sure that you are setting good boundaries for yourself. Second, I want to encourage you to practice self-care. I've been very intentional these past few weeks to keep a good hold on what I'm eating, and I'm eating healthy foods, and I'm eating healthy snacks, and I'm putting good food and good energy into my body. And I've also been very intentional to make sure I'm walking a lot, and I'm getting out and running in the morning, and I'm doing exercise and movement throughout the day, so that my body doesn't carry all that stress on me. These past few weeks, I've been walking probably anywhere between 12 and 16,000 steps a day. I've been running 4 or 5 days a week, getting out and breaking a sweat in the morning. And I've been very consistent to make sure I'm moving throughout the day, and I'm not just sitting sedentary and being still. And I want to encourage people to do that. That when we hold stress in our bodies, it can exacerbate itself when we tend to stay sedentary. And if you're able to move, if you're able to exercise, if you're able to break a sweat, if you're able to get out and be active, that will definitely help the stress that you're feeling and the tenseness that you feel within your own body. And so I want to encourage you, my relatives, to make sure that you are practicing self-care. Make sure that there are people you can talk to, that you're getting consistent movement, that you're eating a good diet, that you're getting good sleep. I've actually been very intentional this past week and a half to make sure I'm getting good sleep. I was looking back over my health stats for the past couple of years, and my watch tracks my sleep every night, and my best sleep, the month I had my best sleep was September of 2024. I slept an average of 6.5 hours, and I was trying to figure out, how did I get as much sleep as I was getting back then? And, I've been working on my sleep for the past couple of years. I used to get about 5.5 hours. I now get between 6 and 6.5 hours every night. But in September of 2024, I was getting 6 hours and 28 minutes every night. It was some of the best sleep I was getting in a long time. And I was looking at what I was doing different during that month. And one of the things I was doing different was going to bed earlier. And so I've actually been working hard to have a better wind down process these past week to 10 days to prepare for the next day, to kind of wind my day down both mentally and physically, and then to get into bed as early as possible. And it's been working. My sleep has actually been up about 10 or 15 minutes a night this week. I've been sleeping more deeply and waking up more rested in the morning. And these are all things that we need to make sure that we're doing, that we're practicing self-care, that we're taking care of our bodies, and that we're also finding ways to enjoy ourselves, right? And to find ways, whether it's talking with family and friends, or getting out and playing games, or being with people that we love and enjoying aspects of our lives and of our relationships, but to make sure that we're not just living in these moments where there's a lot of fear and tension going on. And so I want to encourage you, my relatives, please continue to practice self-care, and please continue to set up really good boundaries. Now, that being said, there are some things I do want to talk about. The first article I want to share with you came from the AP. I read the headlines the other day, and it was about something Trump said of wanting to use the God Squad to increase logging. And right, whenever I hear anything about Trump and God, I get very nervous. And so I was doing a little research into this. And the God Squad is actually something that it's a committee that is able to be convened to basically look at environmental issues and weigh economic needs over environmental issues. And by convening this quote unquote God Squad, and the reason it's called the God Squad, and just from this AP article, there's a section that says, what is the God Squad? It says, officially called the Endangered Species Committee, it was established in 1978 as a way to exempt projects from the Endangered Species Act protection. If a cost-benefit analysis concluded it was the only way to achieve net economic benefits in the national or regional interest. And so basically, they call it the God Squad because the God Squad can basically override environmental protections and trying to keep animals and environments from going extinct if they determine that this is something in the best interest of the region or our nation economically, not just in the short term, but even in the long term. And one of the things about this, and again, Trump is testing the limits of what he can do and what he can't do and who is going to hold him accountable. Republicans have decided they're not going to hold him accountable and they're going to let him do whatever he wants. Judges, even the judges he appointed, are at least ruling against him, but they don't have the ability to hold him accountable. And so someone needs to step in. And so there is a little bit concern about that. But the God Squad can't just be convened by the president. They go on in this article to say the Secretary of the Interior can convene the committee only for a specific project and only if the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service or the National Marine Fisheries Service, after required environmental review, concludes the project would jeopardize survival of a protected species. So again, this is not something Trump can just snap his fingers and convene. There is a whole very intentional process that needs to happen before this can be convened. But it is something that he has said he's interested in trying to use to address what he is calling an energy crisis that we are in. And so I wanted to share this article with you because, again, the headlines can be kind of gaslighting and they can be very troubling. But when you read the articles, it's like, okay, there's a bit of a protection here. And so we don't need to get as panicked, but there are definitely some things we need to be concerned about. And my concern about this is this nation, not just Trump, but this nation has consistently demonstrated its willingness to put short-term economic gain ahead of the environment. I mean, we both Democrats and Republicans have done that. And so this is one of the reasons why I wanted to bring this up, because this is something we need to keep watching, because this is not only something that, yes, Trump could do this, but this is something that Democrats could allow Trump to do because he's actually appealing to a bipartisan value, which is economic advantage over environmental damage. And so I wanted to share that with you. The other thing I wanted to share with you is this AP article I read, and I'm gonna put this one into the link too. Again, and this is just the very dangerous and hectic way that both Donald Trump and Elon Musk are going about with their the government efficiency, the Doge thing. The CDC recently sent out 180 emails to fired employees titled "Read this email immediately" and calling them to come back. And this is, right, the thing that is most troubling about what Elon Musk and Donald Trump are doing is it's not that they're trying to make our government work more efficiently. That's, again, not a horrible value. It's that they're treating the people who receive these services and the people who offer these services, both the employees and the people who are benefiting from these services, as if they were not human. They are dehumanizing both the employees and the beneficiaries of these services. And they're cutting these things upending people's jobs, upending people's lives, without taking time to actually calculate what is the long-term implications of shutting this office or shutting down this service or doing something differently. And that is dehumanizing to the people who both provide the services and who receive these services. And this, again, is very, very troubling, because once you begin the process of dehumanizing, then there's justification to do whatever you want, because you're not dealing with people, you're dealing with numbers, you're dealing with statistics. And this is where, again, we as a nation need to remember the human toll of all of these things. And we need to keep these things very much in the forefront of our minds. The last thing I want to talk about, and I mentioned this in the podcast a week ago, or 2 weeks ago, was our need to protest strategically. And headlines and done, and not just on a national, global level, and with what's going on both in Gaza as well as in Ukraine. The whole meeting with Zelensky, and the talk about Greenland and Panama and the expansionism that Trump is advocating for, which again is a bipartisan value. And in a podcast I did a few weeks ago, I talked about the need to protest strategically, not just jump on every crisis that Trump creates. And I've been thinking very intentionally of what do I need to do, what do I want to do to protest strategically. And the thing that I am working on is, and that I'm convinced needs to be addressed, is the lack of a common memory that we hold as a nation. And Trump is, with his DEI work, is painting this picture of white people are being oppressed and they're missing opportunities, and this just completely disregards the history of this nation that has consistently placed the needs and the welfare of white people over and above the people of those on the margins, whether it's people of color or people from LGBTQ or even women, right? We have consistently put up white landowning men over and above everybody else, and given them advantages and lowered the bar for them in ways that are unimaginable, and made things harder for people from the margins. And now these white landowning men are screaming and saying, hey, we're not being treated fairly. And it's just a complete ignorance of our nation's history. And I've decided, instead of screaming about that, I want to do a better job of educating about it. And so this week, tomorrow actually, I jump on a plane and I'm flying to San Francisco, and I'm giving 3 presentations in San Francisco. I'm giving one tomorrow night. On Friday, March 7th, I will be at Grace Fellowship Community Church in San Francisco, and I am speaking about decolonizing health and faith. I'm going to talk about my own health journey, but also about how so many of our chronic diseases and health crises that we face as a nation come from our colonial values and lifestyles. And we need to look at the distinction between indigenous wisdom versus scientific data. Not that we throw out scientific data, but we need to embrace the wisdom of our indigenous communities. And we need to use this as we strive to improve our health through decolonizing our lifestyles. And so I'm going to be talking about that tomorrow evening at 7 p.m. or 7 p.m. Pacific time. And that will be at Grace Fellowship Community Church in San Francisco. On Saturday, I'm going to be speaking at Bethel Community Presbyterian Church in San Leandro, California, just across the bay. And at 5 p.m. on Saturday, I will be talking in an event about common memory. And this title is wrong. It's no longer called Introducing Lincoln. Let me give you the title of that event. I actually have it here. But the title of that event I'm doing, where is it? Is an honest conversation regarding colonialism, Christian nationalism, and white supremacy. The content isn't changing much, but the way we're presenting it to draw people in. And what I'm going to be talking about is, again, our nation's lack of a common memory. And we don't understand our own history. We don't remember that, or don't even know that Joe Biden is every bit the Christian nationalist that Donald Trump is. That many things, some of those dangerous things Trump is advocating for, are actually bipartisan values that are expressed and embedded in our foundations and our founding documents of this country. And so I'm going to be talking about that, the doctrine of discovery, Abraham Lincoln, both left and right political, as well as conservative and liberal theological positions, and try to shift people's paradigm to recognize, we need to stop screaming at a partisan level and deal with these values that are bipartisan and foundational in nature. We need to create a common memory. On Sunday, I'm going to be preaching back again in San Francisco at Grace Fellowship Community Church. I'll be preaching on radical inclusivity from Acts 10. This, again, is the first chapter of my book I'm working on currently called Decolonizing Faith. And I'm talking about why it's been 1,600 years, or 2,000 years since the birth, death, and resurrection of Jesus. And not only does the world still struggle to acknowledge everybody's humanity, but the church still struggles and even refuses to acknowledge everybody's humanity. And why is that? And I'm going to be addressing some of those questions in that sermon. And so if you're in the San Francisco area, I welcome you to attend any of these events. They're all free and open to the public. I know the Saturday event, they are asking for donations for childcare and for other things. They're actually asking for donations to help cover my honorarium for that event because I'm doing pretty much all of these events. I'm doing the Sunday event and the Saturday event at lower cost than I would normally get for doing an event such as that. And I'm not being paid anything for the Friday event. I wanted to get out there and talk and do that. And I said to the church, even though you can't afford to pay me, I would still want to do an event because I think these are things that are important for us to talk about. So, and I think I'm going to be doing that more and more over the next several months and years, as I'm going to be focusing more on what do we need to do just to get this message out, and be creating even probably a tier on my Patreon, as well as doing some other fundraising, maybe through GoFundMe, to invite people and give people a chance to kind of help share in those expenses and cover some of that, both travel expenses as well as honorarium for me, because I do need to continue to put food on the table. But these are the things that I've just decided I want to begin working very proactively, not to scream and not to just yell and add to the chaos, but to teach a more productive, to engage a more productive conversation around creating common memory and hopefully getting to the heart of the issue, which is why we have these screams and these screaming matches and these divisions in the first place, which is because many, many, many people either ignore or are intentionally ignorant about the history of this nation. So anyway, my relatives, these are the things I'm working on. I'm very excited about all the stuff that's coming up. And I invite you to continue to follow me. If you want to go deeper into these discussions, one of the best ways to engage with me and to support my work and keep my voice independent is to subscribe to me on Patreon. I have a content I put up almost on a weekly basis, several times a month. I put up additional content on my Patreon and have many ways, including a Q&A that you can engage with me on Patreon. It's one of the best ways to help keep my voice independent. Another way, and I am continuing to promote my book, Unsettling Truth, and to teach this history. This is one of the best resources I have to create this common memory. And even though it's been out for 5 years, we've sold 30 to 35,000 copies of the book. That's a pin drop, not even a pin drop in the population of this nation. And so that means there are millions and millions of people who have never heard or engaged with this content. And I really want to continue to press this this history and to teach this history and to get people to engage with it as best I can. My relatives, I appreciate all of you. Let me look and see who's commenting here. Where are we? Andrew, Yacht A, thanks for joining. Appreciate you being here today. Jordan, Yacht A, thanks for being here today. I won't see many palm trees up in Northern California, but I am going to go to LA and if sometime in the coming months, and I'm looking forward to that. I am definitely looking forward to some of the conversations I'll be having in California this next weekend. So my relatives, thank you all. Andrew, thank you for being here. Susan, thank you for being here. Susan, I'm going to share this. You just put this into the chat. Well, I won't click on it, but it sounds like you have lost someone in your relational circle because of some of the craziness that's been going on. And my condolences are with you, Susan, and I continue to pray for all the people who are being harmed by the chaos that's going on. And I continue to pray for our nation and for the citizens, not just of our country, but of the globe, as we deal with the crises that are emitting out of our nation. Anyway, my relatives, I appreciate all of you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for joining me for a cup of coffee. I hope your second cup of coffee is as good as mine was. But walk in beauty, my relatives. And may we all learn how to walk in beauty together. Ahiahat and hakon net.